Welcome to a Climate-Wise Communities workshop and bushfire simulation. My name is James Chan, and I'm a project sustainability officer, sustainability project officer here at Ku-ring-gai Council. So I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which we meet today, and I pay my respects to the elders past and present. And before we move on with the main workshop, I'd like to begin with some basic housekeeping. At the top of your page, there should be a chat box or button. If you want to send us a message about some technical issues, or you can't hear us, or you're having trouble participating in the workshop, use that to send us a message. And if you have a question for one of the presenters, you can ask that question via the Q&A button that should be on your screen as well. Okay, so I'd like to do some introductions. Here with us today is Dr. Jenny Scott. She is Ku-ring-gai Council's Sustainability Project Leader. And we have Mark Schuster, who is Council's Bushfire Technical Officer. I'm sure a few of you here might have already spoken with him at some stage during the past couple of years. Joining us from the Ku-ring-gai Brigade is Captain Andrew Wilson, and shortly Sam Tucker. So Andrew is from the Kalara Brigade
That's right.
of the RFS, and joining with us soon will be Sam Tucker and perhaps Nick Lyons from the Ku-ring-gai Bushfire Brigade as well. But they'll be joining us in a couple of moments. They're having some technical issues joining. And last but not least is James Manuel from New South Wales Fire and Rescue. James will be here talking about the Community Fire Unit program, as well as contributing his experience with bushfire to today's workshop. So today's workshop is based around the Climate-Wise Communities program, and this program was developed in the wake of the Black Saturday fires in 2009, and it incorporates the findings from the Royal Commission. One of the key findings was that very few people had bushfire survival plans, and those that did have a bushfire survival plan, none of them worked when the fires came. And the aim of this workshop is to show you the worst case scenario, just like those fires back in 2009 and 2019-20, those kind of worst case scenarios and how they could affect or impact the Ku-ring-gai community. So in this situation, you need to prepare. So it shows you what you need to prepare for. And if you can plan for these kind of worst case scenarios, then you can handle anything less. So before we get stuck into things, I need to run a quick poll to capture where you are at in terms of your bushfire preparedness. The poll is about 10 questions, and it's pretty easy to answer. And if you can't answer a question, tick either, I think there's a few options of NA, doesn't apply, or one of those kinds of buttons. So I'll give everyone a couple of minutes to complete the poll before I close the poll and move on to the next portion of the workshop.
James, while people are doing that, Sam's trying to get in.
Yep. I'm watching that now.
She's not a panelist.
Okay, so I'll just quickly go through the questions here. So the first few are fairly straightforward. And if you do have if you don't have a bushfire, if you've answered question 3 as a no, which is no to a bushfire survival plan, just go ahead and answer question 4. But if you already have a plan, then you just tick NA to that question. And for question 5, if you click NA, I do not have a plan. But if you do have a plan in question 5, just go ahead and answer that question as to where you keep the plan. Is it in your head? Is it written down? Or is it written down and shared with family or friends? And so forth for the rest of those questions. Now, one of the questions is about the kind of work that I've done to your house to make it more resilient to bushfires. Now, it's too hard to have an exhaustive list here on this poll. So if there's something that you have done to make your house resilient to bushfires, but it's not listed there in that question, tick nothing yet, and then add what you've done into the chat box, and then we can collect that information later. Okay, so I think most people have had a chance to answer most of almost everyone has had a chance to answer the poll. So I'll close the poll now. So thank you very much to everyone for doing that. Okay, so now about this workshop. The workshop is at the core of this workshop is the sim table. Now, the sim table was purchased back in 2019 as part of a grant-funded project, and it's technology that comes from the United States, and it helps us simulate how fires can behave within the Ku-ring-gai area. And as part of that sim table, we also can show you past fires. So the fires we'll be showing you today will be the Camp Fire, which is a fire that devastated the town of Paradise in California in 2018. And then we'll be showing you a fire which happened not far away from Ku-ring-gai in the Gospers Mountain region as part of the 2019 fires. Then after that, we'll show you a simulated fire in the Ku-ring-gai area. So before we start on the campfire, I'd like to introduce Sam Tucker. She's managed to join us today. Hello, Sam. How you doing? Okay. So now over to Dr. Jane Scott, who will take us through the campfire.
Okay, thank you, James. The campfire happened in North America, and up until that Hawaiian fire just recently, it was the most destructive fire in the history of California. Although Hawaii is not in California, so maybe it is still the most destructive fire. It's named after its place of origin, which was Camp Creek Road. It's called the campfire by the fire services over there. And it was just outside the township of Polgar, which James will show you where Polgar is. And it was one of the costliest fires in American history, both in terms of lives lost and insured losses. And what we're going to show you is why, even though this was a prepared community, those losses occurred. The conditions immediately leading up to and during the fire created highly combustible fuel loads in the mountains that were heavily forested. There was a heavy grass cover due to a wet spring, and an unusually dry autumn had followed. The decreased humidity due to several recent wind events with the winds coming off the deserts, and unusually dry fuels. Hot, dry, gusty winds were evident on the day, and it was a red flag warning day, which is similar to our extreme catastrophic ranking. Fuel loads in and around the township of Paradise were high as there was no record of the vegetation ever having been previously burnt. So they weren't doing hazard reduction burning around Paradise. And James, can you show us where Paradise sits? Yep, just in there. So on Thursday, November the 8th, around 6:15 a.m., a problem was detected in a power line around Po Dam, not far from Polgar. Within a few minutes, calls started coming in, reporting a fire in the area. Fire tankers dispatched to the fire were unable to gain access because of the winding, narrow mountain roads that the fire trucks were unable to navigate. Aircraft were grounded with the winds gusting over 85 kilometres an hour, which was above the acceptable limit for the waterboarding aircraft to fly. Aircraft were unable to fly until later that afternoon. The community in the township of Concow, which is a little further to the south, didn't receive any warning before the fire hit the town around 7 a.m. Now remember, the fire started at 6:15. So 45 minutes later, it's hitting a town near Paradise. A caller at 7:07 a.m. reported that the fire in Concow was being driven by high winds, and they reported it as ripping through the area. At 7:23 a.m., the sheriff's office in the township of Polgar began evacuating residents. Calls from residents in Concow and Paradise continued to come in over the next hour at the rate of 1 per minute. They were told there was no danger, that the fire was to the north of Ku-ring-gai and that no evacuations would be necessary, and they would be contacted should there be any threat of danger. By 8 a.m, so we got the fire going, James? Just a little hard to see. Was that a yes, James?
Sorry, I'm always on mute. I always forget. Sorry, apologies. Yes, there is a slight issue with the sim table. Normally this is a bright yellow and orange, but for some reason tonight it's showing up as a dull brown. So this area here is the fire itself. So just imagine that this is a yellow, scary fire.
Okay, so that brown smudge up there is the fire. So by 8 a.m, the fire had entered the eastern areas in the township of Paradise. And the reason that happened, as you will soon see, is that there were embers spotting well ahead of the fire front and igniting fires close to Paradise. Now, that's about a 20-kilometre run in less than 2 hours. So that's how fast the wind was blowing, and how hard it was blowing was carrying those embers well ahead of the fire front. So James is just circling where those embers ignited. Several minutes later, Butte County Sheriff's Department issued an evacuation order for the entire town of Paradise. Wind speeds were now exceeding 90 kilometres an hour, and the fire was growing rapidly. Most of the residents of Ku-ring-gai and many of Paradise were unable to evacuate before the fire arrived. Due to the speed of the fire, firefighters, for the most part, never attempted to try and control the fire, but had to concentrate their effort on saving lives. According to the California fire chief in dispatch, he said, "Pretty much the community of Paradise is being destroyed. It's that kind of devastation. The wind that was predicted came and it's just wiping us out." The first hours of the fire saw a cascade of failures in the emergency alert system, rooted in a patchwork network with an opt-in nature, so people elected to go into it, and compounded by the loss of 17 cell phone towers. These points for failures in a fast-moving fire allowed no room for error by anyone on the ground. Thousands of 911 calls inundated the 2 emergency dispatchers on duty. Emergency alerts suffered from human error as city officials failed to include 4 at-risk areas in the city in evacuation orders. Technical errors on the day meant that the emergency alert failed to reach 94% of Paradise's residents. In the first 4 hours of the campfire, it caused 86 civilian fatalities, with 12 civilian and 5 firefighters injured. 18,804 structures destroyed, 62,000 hectares burnt. This is in 4 hours, with a total damage bill of 16.5 billion, of which 4 billion were uninsured losses. So this kind of eventuality, whilst it's at the extreme end, is the kind of fire that we want people to prepare for. Because if anything less than this happens, you'll have it well in hand. But if this happens and you're prepared for it, you're going to have a much better chance of A, surviving, and B, your house surviving. So we're going to show you now the Gosper Mountain Fire, which was one that was very close to Sydney and very close to impacting the area on the north side of Ku-ring-gai. And that was part of the 2019-2020 fires. And a couple of our fire people here were actually engaged in fighting that fire and can give us some first-hand information on what that was like. So it's the biggest fire in Australian history, I believe. So you'll see when James starts this fire, some features of it that made it so unpredictable and difficult to fight, let alone difficult to give people alerts about when to leave. So that's one of the things we want people to remember, that these fires aren't always going to be predictable enough that the alerts get to you at the right time. So you have to keep yourself informed in several different ways, and also be prepared what happens if you don't hear anything. But I'll hand over to James to show us this particular fire.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Now, this fire, as everyone will know, was quite a very, very big fire. And it started on the 16th of October 2019, and it burnt about 512,000 hectares. 90 homes were lost, and countless animals and insects were also killed. And it was only put out by extreme rainfall on around the 8th of February 2020. So the conditions leading up to this fire aren't that much different to what, well, good deal, actually, sorry, let me backtrack there. It's actually a good deal different, but there are some similarities between what we're experiencing now and what happened back in 2019. So, however, where it differs, though, is that in 2019, New South Wales had experienced the hottest and driest year on record. The 3 years prior to that, from 2017 and 2000 to 2019, areas of New South Wales had the lowest rainfall on record, and all of New South Wales was in drought. So that's how it differs from now. So there was the fuel loads in the area were actually fairly normal. They were not elevated. The main difference was that the fuel moisture was extremely low. So that's something that's very important to bear in mind. So there's no evidence of poor forest management or anything like that. In fact, large areas of the Blue Mountains area had had some hazard reduction burns, but those had little impact on the progression of the fire. So the fire started on the, as I said, on the 26th of October, and it was from a lightning strike. Let me just get rid of that box there again. And during that day, there was about 19,000 lightning strikes. However, it just took one that hit a tree in the Gossams Mountain area in the Blue Mountains National Park. So 2 hours after the fire, about 65 hectares were burnt, and there were also winds of 60 to 70 kilometers per hour, which also meant that helicopter crews could not get into the area to put the fire out. So, and again, the same wind that stopped the fire crews from getting up in the air also made it a very fast moving fire. So the same time the next day, about 520 hectares were burnt. And this was at the same period of time where fire crews were stretched quite thinly across the state, and in fact over in different areas in different states, Queensland and New South Wales. But at this point, the fire wasn't a major concern, but despite the fact that it was moving very quickly. As you can see, within a few days after it happened, it started on the 26th, it's now the 29th, and the fire is quite significantly bigger. So I'll speed things up again. It is a very big fire. It does cover a long period of time, so you have to bear with me while I fast forward through the fire at various points. Now, the fire does die down. Rains do come and calm it down a bit, but not long after the rains, we get catastrophic fire danger conditions, which dry up all the rain and create tinder dry conditions all over again. And that happens around about the 13th or so of November. So I'll just fast forward to that. So as you can see, the fire is burning to the wind is typically coming from the northwest, which means it's pushing the fire down towards the southeast. And you can see the general trend in that direction. So as the fire is growing larger, I have to zoom out again, give you a bigger perspective. Okay, so we're coming up onto the 12th and 13th of November, and this is going to see the first really big fire run where the fire travels 12 kilometers in one day. Now, when this happens, there really isn't much that can be done to stop the fire. So there you go. You can see the fire is taking a bit of a run there. And as we creep up to the 12th and 13th, you'll see another big fire run. And when that fire run happens on the 12th, I think the reports of pyrocumulonimbus forming over the fire grounds that were causing other lightning strikes to spark more spot fires not far away. Here we go. That's that fire run there. That was 12 kilometers in 2.5 hours. So again, it's the important thing to mention is that it's the conditions on the day that really can drive fire behavior badly. And I'll open this up to anyone in fire rescue and the New South Wales and rural fire service to comment on that if they like. So I'll fast forward again to another key point in the fire. As you can see down here, you have ember attack there starting to start more fires ahead of the main fire front. Now, when you have embers traveling up to 5, 6, 7, 10 kilometers ahead of the fire front, it makes fighting a fire very difficult and also makes it a very fast moving fire. And as we move on, you'll see more fires start in the northwest. These fires were started due to lightning strikes, and those lightning strikes caused the Little Elk Complex, Thompson's Creek fire, and the 3 Mile Creek fire. And over time, those fires join together, and then you get what's known as the mega fire. And it was also at that point where it became Australia's largest fire in recorded history, or in recent history anyway. So I've zoomed out here again, just to give you a bit of perspective of how big the fire has become. Also, so that when the other fires start up, you get to see exactly where they are. So if you keep your eye out to where my cursor is, just in the middle right of the screen, you'll see these brown spots appearing. That's the Thompson Creek, Little Elk Complex, and 3 Mile Creek fire. Again, they move pretty fast and they join up to the main fire front. Also, I'd like to point out that if you down in the around the Wiseman, if you can see the fire has moved down to the Hawkesbury River area, and just where my cursor is, where it says Dorrig National Park, that's where you have the Wiseman's Ferry. And there was a big concern that the fire was going to jump the Hawkesbury River and threaten the north shore of Sydney. And in fact, you can see exactly how close the fire got to the north shore. And when you consider that fire run, that brought the fire 12 kilometers in 2.5 hours, you can imagine how concerned the fire authorities were that had the fire jumped the Hawkesbury River, it could easily be on the doorsteps of the North Shore in a very short period of time. In fact, estimates were that the fire could reach the North Shore in about 1 day. Now, if I can just draw your attention up to the main fire, to the fires up north there, they begin to join the main fire front there and create that mega fire that we all know. So the fire continues to burn for a good number, for a good while yet, and it only gets put out due to extreme rainfall. Now, this rainfall event was so extreme that it filled the Warragamba Dam from about 40% up to 90%. So we saw a period where you had extreme drought due to extreme fires and then extreme rainfall. And after that, we had three years worth of La Nina, which led to ideal growing conditions to build up the fuel load that we're all very concerned with now. So hopefully in the next part of the workshop, Mark and members of the Fire and Rescue and RFS can talk about how that 3 years of La Nina and high rainfall has created conditions that we need to be quite concerned with right now. So I'll pause it now and zoom out and show you the context of the fire in the rest of Sydney. So you can see it's quite a large fire, and it's actually almost larger than Sydney. But,
so, James, does Sam or Andrew or James have anything to add to this fire about their experience?
I can add something. I guess something to premise this with is that we actually had crews attending fires in Queensland and the far north coast from late July and early August of the same year. So we unfortunately were well experienced at fighting fires like this at that point. Andrew, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I remember all this quite well. It was from the middle of November that this fire became a concern. The key objective, as James says, was to keep it from jumping the Hawkesbury River. We did an enormous amount of backburning night after night around the area there, just north of Wiseman's Ferry and across the other side of the Hawkesbury to try and prevent that, with the key risk being jumping and rapidly impacting that whole northern built-up area of Sydney.
I was actually staged at Wiseman's Ferry, advising passengers on the ferry of what their exit strategies would be in the event that the fire took a run. So it was quite a dramatic time for all of us.
So sorry, James from Fire and Rescue. Similar, we chased the fire down from border to border at that point, over that season. We found the fatigue set in too. There was a lot of fatigue with the firefighters, but also a lot of the media. It was just been a long campaign fire. It hadn't quite got that fatigue set in at this point of the fire, but yeah, there's certainly complacency. People sitting. Remember, ash was coming in people's backyards and pools from a lot of the fires around Sydney at that time as well.
And I believe there's also a lot of residents that were given warnings to leave quite frequently, and it kind of also led to that sense of complacency as well, because there was always fire somewhere present, and so I think it in some cases there were situations where residents, did not take the heed of warnings after a while, because they were so used to fire being around the area. So yeah. So I think what we can do now is move on to the next portion of the workshop. And what the scene I'd like to set for everyone watching the webinar tonight is that let's just assume or pretend that the fire was not stopped, and a gust of wind or weather conditions were not favorable and pushed embers across the Hawkesbury River, and the fire crews were not able to deal with the sheer amount of embers that are coming across the river, and the fire jumped into the Wiseman's Ferry area and made its way towards the Ku-ring-gai area. So what I'll do now is I'll set that scenario up, and we'll get started on that. So over to you, Jenny.
Thanks, James. So in this part of the webinar, what we do is we show you what an extreme event might look like in Ku-ring-gai. Now, this is not to say this is how an extreme event will look in Ku-ring-gai. It's one of thousands of ways that a fire might burn its way through our area. But we're giving you this footprint, just a way to get you thinking and planning for some of the eventualities that could happen. Our area's very fire prone. If you ever look at a fire map of Ku-ring-gai, you'll see that all the borders around the urban area and the forested area are all fire prone. And there's something like 14,000 houses on the bushland interface. How many kilometres of bushland interface is there, Mark?
I've walked the whole lot, so I can tell you. 99 kilometres of actual interface where bushland wiggles about with the houses. So it's quite extensive, even though our LGA is only 90 square kilometres. We've got a huge interface. Yeah, so very hard to manage.
And you'll see the topography is the development is mostly along the ridge lines, and the gullies are forested. Now, that gives the potential for fire to go quite deep into the urban areas, which is another issue because it can easily cut off exit routes. So we're going to simulate a fire in the area, and at the same time, in conjunction with that, we're going to walk you through the Climate Wise Communities website, because we'll find out what the emergency services are doing at various points during the fire. And you need to think about what it is that you would be doing during these different points in the fire. Remembering that leave early, particularly on days that are extreme or catastrophic, is the best option. That's the Rolls-Royce, the gold standard, leave early. So what we'll do is we'll get James to start a fire. We'll say it's come across from Gosper Mountain, which means that the fire units of the area would be pretty busy, wouldn't they? One of our fire people.
Well, yes, and in fact, in leading up to it, it's remarkably similar to what we've seen today. Today was an extreme fire danger rating for the first time in probably 3 years since early 2020. So various weather conditions, cause that rating. The weather conditions of concern, hot, dry day, lower humidity, and wind or gusty wind, particularly from the northwest, which is the typical bushfire sort of weather. And in the lead up to that today, we've responded pretty much as we would in this scenario, which is we've put crews on standby. We've been organised to respond in groups of brigades to certain areas of concern, and have a higher level of readiness, than we would at other times of the year. And we've done all that today, and certainly on a day with extreme weather in this sort of scenario, we'd be doing much the same. It would be a lot of forward planning. We're a volunteer organisation, the RFS, but we have had members standing by at stations today who've been able to fit that into their schedule. And
I was.
just a higher degree of readiness for what may have eventuated is how we'd be initially planning our approach for a day like today.
Right, thank you.
Sam, you were saying something?
Yes, I was at standby at station today. I had a fire call yesterday to return to a hazard reduction that had reignited. And we had another fire call today, and both Clara and Ku-ring-gai crews were responded to the Charlton HR because of the weather conditions and the gusting winds today to be available to protect the community. So, we're early spring, and this is what it looks like.
Okay, thank you. James, I imagine fire and rescue would be doing something similar?
Yeah, we have a little different in that we have a lot of permanently manned stations. We move a lot of our resources to the urban interface on days like today, and we have strike teams stand up. We call in a lot of resources from the quieter stations. We activate them and bring them in and pre-position. A lot of the times we work hand in glove with the RFS about where to stand up and where to pre-position our crews. And yeah, a lot of planning, a lot of that stuff is all going up with a lot of very strong mutual aid agreements between the two services.
Great, thanks, James. And Mark, what would council be doing?
Yeah, we'd be pretty proactive. Actually, council is a member of a local emergency management group, and that is council, police, of course, RFS, fire and rescue, SES, and also National Parks and Wildlife. And that's a group that will look at particularly the emergency, the evacuation side if needed. And police particularly will know where the pinch points or roads that clog up easily are. So they'd be ready to go out to free up some of those roads for an easier, I must admit, easier evacuation route. Like North Turramurra has 5,000 people. So you've got to consider with traffic lights and pinch points where it's near bushland, where trees can come down across the road. You've got to look at all those issues. So yeah, our local emergency management group would be in action well before the fire. Thanks.
Yeah, so what we want you to consider is what you'd be doing at this point in time. So we're just going to have a little look at climate-wise communities, the first step, because it allows you to look at your property and decide if it's at risk of bushfire. So it might be at risk of other extreme weather events like storm and heat. But tonight we're just going to mainly concentrate on bushfire. So we go to step 1. And after we sign to say we promise we won't sue anybody. And you type in your address. So this little box comes up. You go type your address, and then you'll see it starts to automatically load with your address. Now, this is a randomly chosen address. And this one you can see has bushfire-prone land, which is the red. It also has a little bit of flooding, and it's also subject to embers and fire in that yellow zone. So if we scroll down, we'll see the boxes that are ticked are the ones that you need to plan for. So in this particular instance, these people need to plan for bushfires, for ember attack. They have exit issues, meaning there's likely only one road in and out. They also have flash flooding is a problem for them. Storm and heat are a problem for everyone in Ku-ring-gai. So those 2 boxes just get automatically ticked on everybody's plan. So this is starting to develop the information that you're going to need to make a really good quality emergency plan. So we go to the next step, and it allows you to consider what your household is like and the certain characteristics of your household that are going to need to be considered when you do an emergency plan. So it will ask you a range of questions, and you can tick the box for the answers, and it will give you a hint as to why that issue is significant for your bushfire plan. So just with the first one, of course, you live alone, so consider if you need help or you can help others. Now, of course, that's not exclusive to people living alone, but people living alone may well need more assistance. Now, we go down and there's a whole range of characteristics about households. Are you a carer? You know, there might be elderly people living with you or people with a disability. Pets in the household is a big one, because you're going to need to plan to not only evacuate the pet, but take with it all the things it needs to keep it happy and relaxed wherever you end up being evacuated to. So whether or not you have your own transport is a key one. If you rely on other people to come and get you, you certainly have to leave early, because if the fire is in the vicinity, more than likely the police will have the roads closed and you won't be able to get someone to come in and pick you up. So leaving early, if you have no transport, absolute must. English proficiency. Now, it might not be you, but it might be your neighbours. So do your neighbours understand what's happening? If emergency alerts are going out, good to check with them that they're aware of them. Home ownership. People who own their own homes are able to make their homes more resilient, to do retrofitting work to resist primarily ember attack, because that's why most houses are lost, but also to a lesser extent radiant heat. So that's an important one. If you own your own property, you've got a lot more options than if you're renting. So when you say go to PDF, that can be saved on your computer, that information, and you can review it later when you make your plan. So that's the first and second steps. Now we'll just go back to our fire and we'll see what's happening. Now you see there's a blue circle up in the top left-hand corner of that map, and that's actually showing you the wind speed and direction. Now, James has slightly changed the wind speed to come in from the northwest, and he has increased the wind speed. Now, built into the computer program that sits behind this modelling is the vegetation type in Ku-ring-gai and a fire model that shows you how fire behaves in different types of terrain. So you'll see that the fire is moving faster uphill. It might grumble along down in the valley and it might go slowly down a hill and then suddenly it will race uphill. Now there's 2 more fires have started ahead of the fire front, and that's due to ember attack. And we roughly estimate that for every increase of wind speed of 10 kilometres an hour, those embers will travel an extra kilometre ahead. So if you've got a 10 kilometre an hour wind speed, you might get it going up to 1 kilometre ahead. If you've got a 50 kilometre an hour, you might go 5 kilometres ahead. So at the moment, we're almost at 50, and 5 kilometres is quite a long distance ahead. So you can see now it's burning up towards North Turramurra, and also the people in North Turramurra would no doubt have been listening to the ABC and looking at their fires near Meap and seeing that there was a fire coming their way. So what would RFS be doing at this point?
Well, we would have sent quite a number of trucks to that fire when it was first reported. But the priority is people protection, making sure public warning messages go out through the Hazards Near Me app, which used to be the Fires Near Me app, and various other media. But it's making sure that people are out of harm's way as best as we can ensure. And second priority is property protection. We're not off into the bush to try and put out this fire. It's very much a case of looking forward to see where it may be impacting next and trying to manage the public through that.
Yep, good. Thank you, Andrew. Sam, do you want to add anything to that?
I guess in addition to that, we may well have community field liaison units advising the public on their best route of exit and to leave as soon as possible. Once the warnings are issued, it's really important that they're listened to. As what happened in South Turramurra, within 10 minutes of the fire starting, there was actually an emergency warning to shelter in place, despite the fact we had probably over 50 units in the area, including fire and rescue, ambulance, police and the RFS. So I think leaving early is always the best option.
Great, thanks, Sam. And James?
Yep, similar. We'll be taking, again, working closely with the RFS and taking a lot of advice. We would pre-position strike teams on that urban interface, setting up in and around behind the houses. We won't go charging in the bush because our trucks are not four-wheel drive. They're positioned a bit too heavy and they don't go so fast down tracks and what have you. But we would have strike teams lined up along those ridges in those different communities, downwind all the way probably down to Manly Dam in this direction, and protect the properties and then follow the fire front as it comes along. I have the CFU program with a series of trailers and neighbourhood-based programs. They would have been activated in preparing for the ember attack. And once the fire front comes, they go and shelter in place until the fire front moves on, and then they come out and help black out. But at this point in time, they'll be either doing an ember attack or then they'll be going to shelter in place as the fire front comes along.
Great, thank you, James. And Mark, I imagine council is opening evacuation centres and looking at where people can safely evacuate?
Certainly, and there is a list on our web, I'm going to put it on the chat or whatever, of our what they call neighbourhood safer places. Now, still, I have to emphasise they're only a last resort, a very last resort, so they're not a preferable place to go and get food and water and that type of thing and shelter. Some are, I don't consider, I wouldn't like to be there during a firestorm or an ember attack. So anyway, I'll give the link to those neighbourhood safer places just in case. So people often ask me.
Can I add? Sorry, can I add to that these neighbourhood places of last resort are actually just open spaces that don't have a canopy above it. They are Very likely, and I know the ones particularly in North Turramurra, they won't have any shelter, they won't have water necessarily. It is unlikely that it would be suitable for pets, the elderly or the very young. And so really we just keep coming back to leave early.
Yep. Thanks, Sam. Okay, so now we're going to flick over back to climate-wise communities. And as was mentioned, your property protection is something that they'll do after they make sure that they're saving the lives of people. So you want your property to be as defendable as possible. Now, you might not stay and defend it, but I can assure you the RFS, when they look at a street that's on fire, they have to choose which houses they think they can defend and which they think they can't. Is that right, Sam?
Yes, definitely. Like when you would turn up in an emergency department at a hospital, they need to do a triage. So just like that, and Andrew could probably unpack that even further, we need to do a risk assessment and look at the properties in the street and make a decision on which ones can actually be saved. And unfortunately, if there isn't the preparation in place, there will never be enough fire trucks for every home. So we do have to make those difficult decisions. Anything to add to that, Andrew?
No, look, that's the reality. This is why we encourage everyone to prepare their property, have that plan in place, and hopefully reduce that risk.
Right. Okay, so this section, step 3 in climate-wise communities, you can choose which hazard type you want to do. We're going to look at bushfire tonight. And what it does is walk you through every part of your property and look at whether or not you've got a strong, resilient feature or one that's really vulnerable. And when we say vulnerable, mostly it's to ember attack. So if embers can penetrate into the roof cavity, for example, and set the house on fire, you could be sheltering inside and not even be aware that your roof is blazing. And the first thing some people have found, unfortunately, is the roof caves in. So this looks at the roof design, and it also rates it. Red meaning it's a real weakness, that particular roof design, and tells you why. Whereas green is a more resilient design. Now, just note that the Bushfire Building Council, and I'm sure RFS and Fire and Rescue agree, that in catastrophic conditions, no building is guaranteed to survive a fire, no matter how well designed and constructed it is. Will that be right? Anybody?
Absolutely. There are times and things where the conditions are such that we are in total defensive mode. Buildings can ignite. We had bushfires that have gone through, and then catastrophic claims come in a month later after it's all well and truly out, and it'll reignite. It's just amazing when things can go, especially on these really hot catastrophic days. It's just we're in defensive, we're looking after saving lives because the building's often unsavable.
Yeah, thanks, James. Okay, so one of the things we look at is whether or not you have roof sprinklers. And of course, associated with that roof sprinkler is you've got to have a water supply. If you rely on mains supply and your pump for your roof sprinkler is electric, it's rather much doomed to failure, because one of the first things that happens in a fire is the power goes out, and then the water starts to fail, because there will be so many people using that water that there's very little left for everybody to share. So you need an independent water supply with a petrol or diesel pump, and making sure, of course, that your hoses that link your pump to your pool and to your house are either buried or of a fire rated material. Otherwise, as has happened to many people, those hoses can melt. So we look at the eaves and the fascias, and weep holes are a major weakness, because if they don't have a fine mesh cover over them, then it is very likely that embers will blow in through the weep holes, and so that subfloor ventilation, and ignite, if you've got anything stored under the house, ignite that material. Mark, you're pretty experienced with. Mark actually is qualified to give bushfire attack level ratings for houses. So perhaps I might get Mark to talk about this a bit more.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. There's something called the BAL, or bushfire attack level, and house construction, there's something called the Australian Standard for House Construction Bushfire Prone Areas, and it goes through a number of levels from low, and most houses in Ku-ring-gai actually were built before 1979 when these came in, up to flame zone, which is it's pretty, can withstand a pretty fair fire, but not, as James said before, a really catastrophic fire. So yeah, there's all these different levels of ratings, and if you put in a DA to do a renovation on your house or extension, if you were in a bushfire prone area, you would have to go through and get a BAL rating assessment done and built to that standard. People ask me to upgrade their house, say from a BAL low, say to a BAL 40. It's a pretty high standard. How much would that cost? It could be in the order of 80 to 100,000, because materials have really gone up in this sort of field at the moment. But you can, even for a few thousand, do a lot of protection against embers. And embers, remember, take out about 85% of all Australian houses. So ember attack is the one, I'd bank my money on. It's a bit cheaper to protect against. So yeah, I can talk about more about BAL later. Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, so we keep scrolling down through the criteria. We look at gutters and downpipes, and I'll leave you to go through this in at your leisure, because it covers all the different aspects of your house. It also looks at the external landscaping and what you've got outside. So, for example, gas tanks, whether they're on a barbecue or whether they're connected to a system in the house. What do you do with those? And one of the things is you've got to turn the gas tank away, the nozzle away from facing the house, because the gas tanks are designed to vent when they get very hot.
Can I just butt in on that one, Jenny?
Okay.
I worked for Logan City Council when there were 3 houses caught fire. A Samoan family had 2 big gas tanks against their house, the vents facing the house, and 9 people died that night. So it shows how important the gas tank orientation is. It really is, because we all suffered from that, I can tell you.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay, we've talked about the water supply and the pump in the pool. So we'll just keep on going down. And then there are a few more miscellaneous issues that we talk about, like doormats, whether your doormat is flammable or not. It's a good point for the fire to start. Air conditioners are another weakness in many houses where embers can get in. So you'll find by the time you get to the end of this category, this section, that you've got a fair idea of whether your property would withstand a bushfire, or whether its weaknesses are such that it would have no chance. And so what some people do is they make sure their insurance is up to scratch. If they can't get their BAL rating up, or they can't afford the retrofitting, the next best thing is to make sure you're well insured. But that bushfire attack level, Mark, did you want to add more about that?
Yeah, it is really the basis of construction in Australia now in our bushfire prone areas, and as we all know, most of our interface is bushfire prone areas of either category 1 or category 2 or a buffer. So yeah, for any new development, it is essential that those BAL ratings are adhered to. And it's based on what they call fire line intensity, which is the radiant heat up against a house wall from the vegetation, how far the hazard, which is the vegetation, is from your nearest house wall. It might be 50, 60 metres maybe in some cases, but often 10 to 20 metres. And sometimes you have to have what's called an APZ, or an asset protection zone, to give that bit of a distance, to give you some leeway between the hazard and your back structure wall. And also it's a defendable space, the APZ, for bushfire fighters to get into, to have some chance of defending your house. So yeah, there's a number of factors in determining the bushfire attack level, the vegetation type, slope, aspect. So it's quite a complex science, and it's evolving all the time. But just remember, yeah, it's pretty important. The BAL is, again, based on radiant heat, but again, the biggest determinant is ember attack. So in some ways, the Australian standard is lacking a bit these days in the ember attack aspect. So always remember that, please, or just ask. I can field some questions if you came to me in council, general questions. Thank you.
And I'd like just to just tack on one extra comment. As Mark pointed out, retrofitting your house again from a BAL low to a BAL 40 can be very expensive. And for those people who don't necessarily have deep pockets for that kind of work, addressing the ember attack issues are fairly affordable. Also, managing your landscaping around your property. So I think managing the grass, keeping the grass low, and removing vegetation away from your walls is a very cheap way of protecting your house from fire. Because if embers land against vegetation that's a bush that's beneath a window and catches fire, well, then you're going to have a heat source up against that window that's going to break that window open, and embers can then enter your house. So the cheapest and first protocol should probably be making sure your own vegetation around your house is in good order, short, well maintained, watered if possible, and the shrubbery is not connected to the canopies of any trees you have nearby to break that ladder effect. Is that right, Mark? Is that, am I on the money there?
Yep, you're on the money. And there's both horizontal ladders. That means you separate your plants on the horizontal, and also vertical fuel ladders, where it can go up from the litter, the leaf litter, to the grass, to low shrubs, up to the lower canopy. So try and break that vertical climb of fire and the horizontal spread of fire. So you've got to think of both things at once. So
And
yeah, it's
a good
quite
example
complex,
of
isn't it?
And a good example of a horizontal break is that brush fences, which can be quite popular. Those they really are. They bring the fire directly to your house. So if you have a brush fence, perhaps consider replacing that with a non-combustible fence. And one little way of remembering how to keep your landscaping is that how I think there was a tendency for houses in the Black Summer that the ones that were for sale had a lower probability of catching on fire, because the house for sale had a nice, neat landscaping. So that's one way of visualizing that.
Here's a funny one for you. Everyone rings us up in council about brush turkeys. They're one of your best fire defenders, because they'll heap everything into heaps for you for their mounds. So it's separating the lower ground fuels. So praise the brush turkeys when you see them. There we go.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, one thing I might just add here is people often get very concerned that a hazard reduction burn hasn't been done in their area in X number of years. One of the things that we hope we're going to demonstrate to you with the sim table is that to depend for your safety of yourself and your house on whether a hazard reduction burn-in has been done recently or not isn't going to make any difference in these extreme and catastrophic conditions. A hazard reduction burn, whether or not it's been done, will still not necessarily save you or your house. So what is more important, and where we're asking people to place the emphasis, is on making their properties more resilient and being extremely well prepared for fire. So yes, there may be an APZ there. Yes, there may have been a hazard reduction burn, but don't be lulled into thinking you're safe, because you're not. Sam, do you want to add anything to that?
Definitely, and I'm sure Andrew can as well. There are many situations, particularly in Gospers Mountain, when we could demonstrate that three months prior to conditions that damaged homes and took out properties, there had been hazard reductions, and that it's not the answer to everything. I've had friends in the Lower Hunter that have actually had their homes nearly lost after hazard reductions had been done. And we're talking several weeks, sometimes months later, where it doesn't necessarily reduce the risk if the conditions are like they look like they could be in the upcoming fire season and like they were in the 2019-2020 fire season. Andrew, do you have anything to add to that?
Oh, they're one of many tools available to reduce the risk of adverse impact. Along with all the other messaging we're giving tonight around the importance of having a plan so you know what to do and preparing your property.
All right.
The other thing I'd like to emphasise is a lot of people ask, can we do a hazard reduction burn every few years? And the answer is no, because there's a prescription for each vegetation type, and often it needs 8 to 15 years so the plants can mature again, they can seed, drop the seed and germinate again to go through the whole cycle. So yeah, we have to think of the ecological needs of plants and animals actually, so we have enough trees with hollows for animals' homes, that type of thing. So no, you can't burn continually in our sandstone landscape. It's pretty special actually.
Thanks, Mark. So if you have a look now at the fire, the wind is now blowing at 50 kilometers an hour and it's coming in from the northwest. And you'll see how the fire varies in the speed. And that's a really important thing to remember, because that's what catches people out. They think, oh, it's so many kilometers away, nothing for me to worry about yet. And then all of a sudden, it's on their doorstep. And that happened repeatedly in Black Saturday. It happened in the Canberra fires, and it happened in the 2019-20 fires. Particularly in the 2019-20 fires, where, if I remember correctly, fires were moving incredible distances at night, whereas normally they settle down at night because of the increase in humidity, but they had fires traveling incredible distances in the middle of the night. Is that right, Andrew?
Yeah, 2019-20 produced a lot of things which hadn't really ever been experienced before, and that was certainly one of them.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so as you can see here, if you've got a well-prepared home and you leave early, well, not only have you saved your own life and that of your pet, if you have one, and your family, you may have also helped your friends. But your house, if you've got it well prepared and you've been addressing the resilient weaknesses where it needs to be improved, then you may well have a home to come back to after the fire has passed. So this is what we're really encouraging people to do, is to look at their properties and make sure that they're as well prepared as possible. So the last section in the climate-wise communities has to do with how neighbourhoods prepare. Now, an enormous body of research has been done which shows that neighbourhoods that work together in a crisis are definitely better off. They have reduced levels of PTSD afterwards, they recover more quickly, and they minimise their losses. So getting to know your neighbours and organising with them how you might work together in a crisis is a really valuable strategy. Of course, it takes a bit of leadership, so it takes someone to stand up and say, yep, I'll get this going in our area. And when you do, you look for people that would be in your area that might have certain resources that could be handy on the day. They might have a minibus so they can help take out people who don't have transport. They might have a chainsaw, who knows. But a very good example of this community coming together and helping each other are the CFU units. And James, would you like to tell us a bit more about them?
Absolutely. So the CFU units are based around, we had an old fixed hose post in World War II. It's a similar thing. We have trailers and cabinets now. We have over 90 in the Ku-ring-gai Council area. And what they are is neighbourhoods, generally between 8 and 15 people. They come together. They are equipped and trained by Fire and Rescue New South Wales to help address a lot of these bushfire, to prepare their neighbourhood for the impact of bushfire. They're not firefighters, so when that fire front comes, we get them to retreat to a safe place. They do attack and defend against ember attack. When the fire front comes and the fire trucks arrive, hopefully they retreat. And then as the fire front moves on, then they come out and they assist blacking out and allow the RFS and Fire and Rescue to move on and follow that fire front. But a lot of the benefits of this community-based fire unit program is that preparation, the public education, and rebuilding networks and amongst the neighbourhoods. And identifying those that are vulnerable, as well as hazards that are in the street, be it solar power, gas, or other, or even if there's a cliff behind the houses and things like that. So a lot of that neighbourhood coming together to be resilient and help themselves before the emergency services can arrive.
Right, thank you, James. So these questions that are on this section are all about how well you know your neighbourhood and how you can better get to know your neighbourhood so that you can work together and develop a plan. Now, if you don't want to set up a CFU unit, you still might be able to do some emergency evacuation working together. So, and it's really just a matter of getting to know both the strengths and the weaknesses of your neighbourhood. So it might be that you have a single entrance and exit. So you're going to need to get out early, and you're going to need people who don't have transport, or who might have a disability, or who live alone. Make sure they have the support to get out as well. So that brings us to the end of the 3 sections of the planning part of climate-wise communities. What we have at the end is a thing that we call the what-if wheel. And the what-if wheel, or as James likes to call it, the wheel of doom. Or no, wheel of misfortune. That's right.
Yes, that's the one.
The wheel of misfortune. And so this is a wheel that people spin, and it lands on one of these options. Now, these are things that have been taken from Black Saturday research that looked at why people's bushfire plans failed. As James said earlier, they nearly all failed because the fire didn't happen the way they thought it would, and one or more of these things happened to people. So what this allows you to do, once you've written your plan, you can spin this wheel, look at the things that it lands on, and see, do you have this covered in your plan? Could your plan deal with this eventuality should it occur? So in this one, your pet's missing, a very common one, particularly cats who will hide when they're frightened, and you can't get them to come out. So when people have cats and they think there might be a need to evacuate, long before the crisis starts to set in, you need to prepare your animals ready to evacuate. So you might put the cat in its carrier cage. You might put a harness on the dog ready to go. So just be aware that animals have a habit of stuffing up your plan. And more than a few people have lost their lives refusing to leave without their pet. So we'll spin it again. We won't spin and look at all of them tonight. That's something you can do in your own time. But it is a good way to look at what goes wrong, commonly has gone wrong with bushfire plans. We also have one for a storm as well. So police block your access. So you mightn't be home at the time and you want to get back in, but the road's been closed. They're not letting people into your road. Now, sometimes police will let residents through, but it depends on the level of risk. If they think the fire's too close, it's too risky, you won't be allowed back in. And if your pet is there or your children are there, you need to have made provision for how that should be dealt with. You might have asked your neighbour to get your pet out. You know, you might have a relative who's gone and got the children, presuming they're not small children, they're older children, but has made sure they've got out safely. So these are the kinds of things you need to consider that could well happen when the event occurs. Okay, so that takes us pretty much through climate-wise communities. I think, James, James as in Chan, have got a little bit to say about Council's bushfire rebate.
Yes, thank you very much, Jenny. Now, as you would have seen in step 3, there's a long list of things you can assess your house against in terms of its bushfire resilience. So if you do step 3 and you discover there's parts of your house that could be retrofitted to make it more resilient to bushfire, well, that's going to cost some money. So to help you with that, Council has a bushfire-wise rebate program that could offer you up to $1,000 to go against the costs of the retrofit, plus an additional $500 to go against the cost of a DA or CDC that's required for the installation of things such as a window or a new door, because those items, when they're being replaced, can trigger a planning process. So how it works out is that we can offer 25% of the costs to a maximum of $1,000, and again, 50% of costs of the DA CDC to a maximum of $500, bringing the total rebate up to $1,500. Now, the items, the kind of retrofits that you can claim against are quite extensive. I won't go into all the details of what you can get a rebate for, but I will say that they are listed here on this council webpage. So if you search on Google, Ku-ring-gai Council bushfire-wise rebate, you'll come to this page. You'll get a result that will take you to this page, and you can look at all the things that you can do to your house to make it more bushfire resilient, for which you can get a rebate for. A common one is gutter guards, but also another common one a lot of residents do take do to the house is to replace any skylights, any perspex skylights, and replace that with toughened glass, or maybe replace the front doors and windows. Often replacing the ridge cap mortar on the house is a very popular one, because it does degrade over time and it can let embers into the roof space, and that's another entry point for embers. So the process is fairly straightforward. When you get to the website, you submit a pre-approved application using this button here, the first green button. You fill the form out, and I receive the application, and then I will email you to discuss what other documents you might need to submit. Those documents will be the step 3 of the Climate Communities website, which you saw being demonstrated here today. So you do step 3, and you make sure you click the Save to PDF button to get your report, which you can submit to me as part of the application. Plus, you need to complete a bushfire survival plan. And hopefully the plan you submit is a leave early one, because that's what we recommend. And then you also include any quotes and specifications for the retrofit you want to do. If you're doing gutter guards, for example, include a quote, and make sure that quote is itemized and includes details of the type of gutter guard you're using. For example, it needs to be metal and made from a non-corrosive metal as well. And once I get those details, I will give you a pre-approval, and you can go ahead and do the work. And then once the work is completed, you come back to the web page here, click submit your final application, supply proof of payment, and any other information that might be required, and I will process your rebate and send you that money. So I think that's. Is there anything else you want to discuss, Jenny, before we sign
Just
off?
a couple of things, two things. One is when you do your bushfire planning, go to RFS website and that'll give you a template to do your plan. Red Cross has
Yes.
as well. And it's a multi-hazard plan, and SES has one for storm. So if you're looking for a template to put all this good information that you've generated from going through ClimateWise together, they're the sources of templates. One thing we haven't shown you, if we go back to the fire, to the sim table. So the fire has burned on a fairly broad area across the north of Ku-ring-gai. But what happens if the weather conditions change? So what we'll do is we will swing the wind around so that it starts to come in. It's a southerly buster on a summer's afternoon, and the wind will be gusting back up to those high speeds, and we'll see what happens with the fire. So we've got active fire all through the north of Ku-ring-gai, and you can see now the fire has changed direction. So Sam or Andrew, do you want to make any comment on what happens now with your firefighting strategy?
Well, I can start just from today's perspective that we start this morning had northwesterly winds gusting to 50 kilometres. Probably most of you have now felt we've had a southerly change. So it was southwesterly, and around 10 to 11 o'clock tonight, there'll be a southerly change, and that is going to gust again till 50 kilometres. So that changes the face of the fire. Andrew, you got anything to add to that?
Well, yeah, you can see the risk suddenly switches direction, creates a whole new area of challenge for us right up there to the north of the map. You know, those suburbs you can see there are about to get the impact from the fire, and obviously this is what makes it challenging when it changes direction so quickly, and people who think they've missed it suddenly become you know, right in the middle of where it's going to bear down. So keeping up to date with what's happening on fires in your local area is vital, and using the Hazards Near Me app and some of the other channels that the RFS and the emergency services have is critical on days like today when there's a fire nearby, so you are aware of what whereabouts it is about to impact, and you know therefore when to implement your bushfire plan.
Great, thanks guys. James or Mark, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, I suppose, Jenny, yeah, just this season, as it swung round, as we know, officially now to El Nino, yeah, we might strike a pretty torrid fire season. I'm just hoping we might still get some heavy stormfalls with severe weather. We could be in for severe weather patterns, so we might still get a lot of strong rainfall. It might give us a week or two reprieve here and there, but I can tell you what, I go around monitoring the fuel loads. They're high to extreme at the moment in many of the interface areas, and it only takes a few days of drying northwesterly winds to dry out our fuel and the fuel moisture down at the lower level, and the vegetation's almost waiting for a fire. So yeah, we do live in a very bushfire prone continent, and I suppose there's a lot of literature coming out now. We can't stop fire totally, but it's trying to learn to live with fire, and it's a hard one because we come from that European perspective of trying to put out every fire, but our plants and animals do need some fire, so it's best balancing how to live with the fire, and I think we're going a long way towards it. Thanks.
Yeah, and I'll just add my little 2 cents to that. Quite often these events are termed or erroneously called natural disasters. The thing is that there's nothing natural about it. It's the fact that we live on interface with bushland that can be on fire. So it's how we respond and how we adapt to the hazard that can play the biggest role in how we can prevent harm from out of control fires.
Okay. All right, I think that's all from me, James.
Okay, great. So what I'll do is I'll stop the screen share here and open up the floor to anyone who would like to ask a question. So please, now is your chance to have any burning questions, and pun intended, to put those questions into the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to answer the questions you have. We do have one question in the chat. Is there a recommended type of roof sprinkler to look at and at installing? I think I can have a go at answering that question. The type of roof sprinkler you might want to be looking at is one that is attached to the gutter guards, or to the gutters, sorry, around the perimeter of the house. So that can create a curtain of water spray or water droplets that will catch the embers and dampen the walls of your house or the perimeter of the house. Putting them along the roof line of the house, along the ridges, doesn't really work, because making a tile or a metal roof wet doesn't really do anything, because metal and tiles don't burn anyway. So it might be better off to put the sprinklers around the edges of the roof.
The other thing, yeah, the other thing to you, Graham, is that there's various types of sprinklers of varying costs. There's non-directional and directional sprinklers, and they found pretty well. There's some great webinars on it from Justin Leonard of CSIRO on sprinkler types and houses, and often the directional sprinklers are far more value than those that just spray water everywhere, so to speak. So yeah, have a look at some of the Justin Leonard videos on the web. They're pretty good, from CSIRO, about sprinkler types. Thanks.
Can I just add to that as well? I think all the residents need to consider how those sprinklers will actually be initiated in the event of their need. And, you know, remembering that very likely there will be no water pressure and there will be no power. Just in the South Turramurra event in 2019, within 10 minutes of arriving on scene, the properties opposite the initial impact of the fire, their bark mulch was self-combusting, and the water they were trying to use from their taps to put it out was a drip. So, you know, the need is to understand how that water will be deployed, and at the last minute, not necessarily an hour prior to the fire approaching.
We have another question, and if I could just ask people to put the questions into the Q&A box, it helps us manage them in case there's a lot coming through. The question we have here is about how do schools close to the bush assess their risk, and on catastrophic days. Sam.
I can answer this one. I have been involved in doing pre-incident planning in North Turramurra, and schools actually have a category for their risk to bushfire. So schools say like Ku-ring-gai High School and St Ives North Public School are category 1, which means that they actually now have facilities on site where they're able to shelter in place. In the event of a catastrophic day, and sometimes in an extreme rated day, the schools will actually be closed the day prior to that day to prevent risk to students and staff. So at 4 o'clock the day before, if tomorrow were to be catastrophic in North Turramurra, Ku-ring-gai High School would be closed already, with the students understanding that they would not attend tomorrow. And that would be more publicised to parents.
I would add to that, with students out of school, that would mean there are a lot more parents at home looking after their children, which would also mean that if you live in a area that has limited exit routes, one way in, one way out, that means there's a lot of people then who would have to leave that area via a one way in, one way out area. So, in that scenario, it really does make the leave early strategy very, very important, because if you don't leave early, you'll be leaving late along with everyone else through an area that could be potentially very congested with a fire bearing down on you. So it's often those other factors that you might need to consider too.
a demonstration of how they deal with schools is the South Coast yesterday when they had their extreme fire rating, and 26 schools were closed. The kids couldn't go to school because they were classed as being at risk.
Okay,
That sort of thing. Sorry, that sort of thing also happens at sporting events when there will be catastrophic days. They are often cancelled as well, even if it's on a weekend. So it's just important to understand to put that into your plan.
We have a question from Ken. Will this presentation be available on the website to watch again? Yes, this website is being recorded, and in a couple of weeks' time, when the recording is being processed by Zoom, and our comms people work their magic on it, it will be made available on YouTube at the Ku-ring-gai Council YouTube channel, and it will also make its way onto the ClimateWise Community's website. If you go to the additional information page, and I'll just share that with you now so you can see where to look. If you go to the website and you go to additional information, go to video gallery, click that. That should take you to a video page where you can see all the past webinars we've had, some educational videos too. And here you have the South Tarahumara, West Pibble, etc., etc. So you can go there to watch the past recordings. So if there's no other questions, are there any closing remarks our presenters would like to make before we conclude the workshop?
Yeah, there was an extra question from Catherine. I just wrote it out quickly anyway, James, about Lovers Jump Creek and fire probability in there. Many of our deep channeled long creeks do have fire intensity come up with them. Council's just done some pretty detailed modelling. I'm really interested in long channel creeks, and yes, fire can come up some of those long creeks from a northward direction depending on wind. Vegetation types, particularly at the top of a lot of these valleys, you'll still get fire coming. That's why we try and put some hazard reduction burns in certain places to block longer fire runs. So yeah, it can happen.
And even if you have rainforest type vegetation, if the conditions are right,
Yeah,
that rainforest
anything
will
can burn.
Anything can burn. Okay. Well, unless there's any other questions, I'd like to say thank you very much to our presenters here tonight, Sam Tucker, Andrew Wilson, and James Manuel, and Mark Schuster, and Dr. Jenny Scott. So thank you very much, and please stay safe this summer. It could be a hot one, and yeah, all the best. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.